In the skies over Burma, where jungle swallowed plains and mercy didn't exist, one young American from Texas fell toward death at 15,000 feet. No aircraft, no escape. Just a parachute, a pistol, and enemy fighters closing in. What happened next was so impossible, the world refused to believe it for nearly 40 years. Before the war reduced men to statistics, Owen John Bagot was just another kid from Graham, a quiet oil and cattle town where the loudest sound was usually the wind across empty roads. His father ran a dry goods store. Owen pumped gas at a Magnolia station for 70 cents an hour, breathing fuel fumes and dust, watching cars come and go, always wondering what lay beyond the horizon. Aviation wasn't a dream handed to him. It was something he bought lesson by lesson, saving every dollar until he could afford time in a cockpit at the local airfield. Flying wasn't romantic, it was mechanical. Gauges vibration, engine temperature, fuel flow. Owen learned early that airplanes didn't forgive mistakes. Then came December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor didn't just attack a harbor, it detonated the future of an entire generation. Within weeks, Owen enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces. No hesitation, no speeches, just paperwork, a train ticket, and goodbye. Texas taught him discipline. Flying taught him precision. And war was about to test whether those two things were enough. Because the skies Owen would face weren't empty, and mercy would not be one of the instruments on the panel. Owen wanted fighters, not bombers. Fighters meant speed control and choice life measured in seconds and angles instead of altitude and tonnage. The P-40 Warhawk was the aircraft he imagined himself in nose-down, throttle-forward hunting instead of enduring. Flight training stripped romance away fast. Medical exams were brutal, precise, indifferent. Charts, letters, lines. Owen missed the vision requirement by a single line. Not blindness, not weakness, just enough imperfection to end a dream. There were no appeals, no second chances. In wartime, standards didn't bend for motivation. The verdict came quietly, unsuitable for fighter operations. Instead, he was reassigned to heavy bombers, large crews, long missions, no dogfights, no glory. Different rules, different death. Bombers were flying fortresses only on paper. In reality, they were aluminum cylinders packed with fuel explosives and men moving slowly through hostile airspace. Survival depended on formation discipline, overlapping fire, and luck. A fighter pilot could maneuver. A bomber crew absorbed punishment and hoped the structure held. Owen adapted. He learned crew coordination, gunnery sectors, emergency procedures, engine failures, bailout drills, fire suppression. Where a fighter pilot fought alone, bomber crews fought gravity, weather flak, and interception all at once. The irony was cruel. He trained to kill at a distance behind mounted guns and metal frames. No one taught him how to fight when all of that was gone. No instructor imagined the day he'd face an enemy with nothing but a parachute harness and whatever he could carry on his body. But war doesn't test what you train for. It tests what you become when training runs out. The China-Burma-India Theater, CBI, wasn't a front line. It was a vacuum where geography killed as efficiently as the enemy. Endless jungle-swallowed aircraft rivers, erased crash sites, and mountains tore apart engines that hesitated for even a second. Pilots didn't talk about distance here. They talked about survivability. From crude airstrips carved into Indian tea plantations The U.S. Army Air Forces launched missions that stretched the limits of physics and endurance. Navigation was primitive. Weather forecasts were guesses. Monsoon clouds rose without warning, icing engines at altitude and blinding crews inside boiling gray walls. One mistake meant vanishing forever beneath the canopy. Japanese forces controlled Burma's airspace with veteran fighter units hardened over China. Their aircraft climbed faster, turned tighter, and operated from bases closer to the fight. Interception wasn't occasional. It was expected. Every mission assumed contact. Every flight plan assumed losses. For bomber crews, CBI wasn't about glory. It was arithmetic. Fuel versus range. Payload versus altitude. Enemy fighters versus defensive guns. The jungle below offered no friendly territory, no rescue teams, no second chances. Bailout meant isolation. Capture meant disappearance. This was a theater where aircraft were lost, weekly crews vanished silently, and survival was considered a bonus, not an outcome. And into this environment, Owen Bagot flew his missions knowing that if something went wrong, the jungle wouldn't care who he was, where he came from, or how hard he wanted to live. In CBI, the sky was hostile. The ground was worse. The mission was supposed to be routine by CBI standards. Take off, climb, form up, cross hostile airspace, drop ordnance, turn for home. But over Burma, routine was just another word for temporary. Somewhere between the jungle ridgelines and the cloud layers, the warning came too late. According to this hypothesis, Owen John Bagot and his crew flew straight into a trap, a heavily reinforced Japanese interception zone. Multiple elements of Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters converged from different vectors: high sun, low, rear quarter, lateral climb. It wasn't a single attack. It was an encirclement. Zeros didn't need numbers to be deadly. They needed angles, speed discipline, patience. Their pilots were veterans men who knew exactly how long a bomber could hold together once its formation collapsed. They didn't rush. They orbited. They chose targets. From inside the bomber, the sky stopped being empty. It became crowded. Shapes flashed past the windows. Tracers stitched the air. Engine noise rose and fell as enemy fighters repositioned with surgical precision. Defensive guns tracked, fired, overheated. There was no single direction to aim. Threats came from everywhere. This wasn't a dogfight. It was a controlled dismantling. Every pass stripped away altitude, speed, and options. Fuel lines ruptured, control surfaces shuddered. The bomber was no longer a machine. It was a countdown. In that moment, survival didn't depend on courage or skill. It depended on timing. And timing over Burma belonged to the hunters. The B-24 Liberator was designed to absorb punishment. 4 engines, redundant systems. Aluminum skins stretched tight over a skeleton of ribs and spars. On paper, it could take hits and keep flying. Over Burma, paper meant nothing. The Zeros came in methodically, targeting engines first. A burst of cannon fire tore through the number 3 engine. Oil pressure collapsed. Flames followed, streaming backward along the wing like a warning written in fire. Moments later, engine number 2 began to cough, then seized. The aircraft shuddered as asymmetric thrust twisted the airframe. Inside, alarms didn't scream. Men did. Smoke filled the fuselage. The interphone crackled with half-finished sentences. Fire suppression failed to choke the flames. The Liberator began to lose altitude, heavy and unresponsive bleeding speed with every second. Formation was gone. Escort was gone. There was only gravity and time. Defensive guns continued firing, but the Zeros stayed just outside optimal range, circling like surgeons waiting for anesthesia to wear off. They knew what came next. Everyone did. The pilot made the call no one wanted to hear: prepare to bail out. At 10,000 feet, the bomber was already dying. At 15,000 feet, it was still burning. Crewmen clipped on parachutes, checked straps by touch, not sight. Training took over where fear tried to interfere. When Owen John Bagot stepped into open air, the Liberator was no longer a fortress. It was debris. Behind him, the aircraft rolled, broke apart, and vanished into smoke and flame, leaving men suspended beneath white silk, alone in enemy-controlled sky, about to learn that the worst part of the mission hadn't even started yet. As the parachutes blossomed across the sky, the rules of war collapsed with them. White silk against blue. Air slow, helpless, unmistakable. From above, the Japanese fighters rolled back into position, noses dipping, throttles easing forward. This was no longer combat. It was selection. One by one, Zeros lined up on drifting figures. Machine guns opened fire in short, deliberate bursts. Tracers ripped through parachute canopies, shredding silk like paper. Men screamed as gravity reclaimed them, bodies tumbling end over end toward the jungle canopy far below. No evasive maneuvers, no return fire, just execution carried out at altitude. For Owen John Bagot, time slowed to a mechanical crawl. He felt the cold bite at 15,000 feet, the numbness creeping into his fingers, the wet warmth of blood soaking through his flight suit. Shrapnel from the bomber's final moments had torn into his thigh. Each heartbeat pulsed pain and dizziness through his body. He counted aircraft, counted parachutes. The math was unforgiving. The fighters would finish everyone unless something changed. The jungle below offered no salvation, no friendly lines, no rescue teams, only miles of enemy-held terrain waiting to finish what the sky began. His issued weapon, a Colt M1911, A1 hung useless at his hip, never meant for aerial combat, never meant for this. Above him, a Zero peeled off and began another run. In that instant, suspended between gravity and gunfire, Bagot understood the truth of CBBI air war survival wasn't about heroism or doctrine. It was about denying the enemy what they expected. And what they expected was a man fighting to stay alive. So Owen Bagot did the unthinkable. He stopped. Instinct screamed at him to move, to steer the chute, to twist away, to do something. Owen John Bagot ignored it all. He went limp. His head slumped forward, arms fell slack, legs hung motionless beneath the harness. No corrections, no oscillation, just dead weight drifting through thin air. Blood leaked from his torn flight suit, dark against the white silk selling the lie better than any performance ever could. From above, it worked. One of the Zeros broke off its run. The pilot throttled back, reducing speed to just above stall, around 95 miles per hour. He wasn't hunting anymore. He was checking. Ammunition mattered. Fuel mattered. Killing someone already dead didn't. The fighter slid closer, canopy sliding open for a clearer look. Wind tore through the cockpit as the Zero eased alongside the parachute, offset by only a few dozen feet. Close enough to see a face. Close enough to be sure. This was the moment Bagot had manufactured. He didn't rush it. He didn't flinch. He waited until the aircraft drifted into perfect alignment. Pilot exposed speed, low angle, shallow. The Zero was no longer a predator. It was vulnerable. Baggett lifted his head just enough to confirm the distance. His right hand crossed his body fingers, wrapping around the grip of the Colt M. 1911A1. No stance, no sights, no margin for error. At 15,000 feet over Burma, pretending to be dead, had bought him the only thing war ever truly gives you: one chance. At that distance, there was no such thing as a warning. The Zero slid in close, 30 feet, maybe less close enough for Owen John Baggett to see the pilot's goggles, the leather flight cap, the calm confidence of a man confirming a kill. The canopy was open. The engine throttled back. The aircraft floated balanced on the edge of stall. Baggett moved. His hand came up in one smooth motion, drawing the Colt M 1911A1 from his hip. No time to aim properly. No way to brace. Wind hammered his arm as the parachute swayed beneath him. He pointed not at the aircraft, but at the man inside it. The first shot cracked through the air, punching past the open canopy. The second struck metal, fragmenting, forcing the pilot to flinch. Surprise replaced curiosity in an instant. The third shot ended it. The round entered just behind the pilot's right ear. Shigeshi Kuro slumped forward lifeless, his weight collapsing onto the control stick. The Mitsubishi A6M0 dipped, rolled, then nosed down into an accelerating dive. Baggett fired once more, instinct not necessity, then watched as the fighter became a falling object, gravity reclaiming what combat could not. Seconds later, the Zero vanished into the jungle below, detonating in a fireball that tore through the canopy and sent black smoke spiraling upward. There were no witnesses, no confirmation, just a man hanging beneath a parachute, heart-hammering pistol shaking in his hand. Against every rule of physics, doctrine, and probability, the hunter had fallen, and the war, indifferent as ever, moved on. The fireball below changed the sky. For a split second, the remaining Zeros lost rhythm. One aircraft spiraling out of control wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not to a man hanging beneath a parachute. Confusion is lethal in combat, and hesitation even more so. According to this hypothesis, one of the remaining fighters rolled in aggressively, reacting on instinct rather than doctrine. Throttle forward, nose down. A fast, angry response to something that made no sense. Owen John Baggett was still falling, still exposed, still wounded. The pistol in his hand was no longer a weapon. It was a statement. 3 rounds left. No reloads, no second chances. The second Zero came in hot, faster than the first, unwilling to slow, unwilling to drift close. This pilot had seen enough. He wasn't curious. He was cautious. Baggett raised the pistol anyway, not to kill, but to force doubt. A single shot cracked upward, disappearing into the slipstream. It didn't need to hit. It only needed to exist. At that moment, the Zero pilot made the only rational decision left. Break off. He rolled hay hard, climbed away, choosing altitude over certainty, survival over proof. In war, outcomes aren't always measured in wreckage. Sometimes victory is disruption. Sometimes it's forcing the enemy to question what should be impossible. As the fighter pulled away, Baggett holstered the pistol. His hands shook. Adrenaline burned through pain and cold. Around him, parachutes continued their slow descent, fewer now, but still falling. The sky had taken enough. He hadn't won. He had endured. And in the Burma theater, that alone bordered on the unbelievable. The impact was brutal, but survivable. Owen. John Bagot hit the jungle-hard branches, tearing at his parachute. Momentum finally bled away by vines and wet leaves. The canopy collapsed around him instantly, dangerous, bright white fabric that could be seen for miles. He cut free fast and disappeared into the undergrowth. The jungle closed behind him like a door. His wound was still bleeding. Shrapnel had ripped through muscle, leaving fire in every step. He tied off his thigh with parachute cord, cinching it tight enough to slow the blood, then forced himself upright. There was no rest. Daylight meant patrols. Japanese infantry controlled the region in depth, well-trained, aggressive, and methodical. They knew downed airmen would try to move at night, follow water, avoid villages. They hunted accordingly. Bagot moved when the sun went down, slowly, silently. Navigation came from instinct and stars barely visible through the canopy. Water came from streams. Food didn't come at all. Hunger gnawed constantly, but thirst was worse. The jungle offered water and disease in equal measure. By the third day, fever set in. Malaria didn't announce itself gently. It hit like a hammer, chills, shaking delirium. His wound began to swell, infection creeping in. Each step became an argument with his own body. He slept in short, broken intervals, pressed against tree roots, knife in hand, listening to the jungle breathe. Insects crawled freely. Sounds meant nothing or everything. A snapped branch could be a monkey or a patrol. On the fifth day, exhaustion won. He collapsed near a water buffalo trail, consciousness fading. When he woke, boots surrounded him. The evasion was over. Survival had bought him 5 days. Now came the part no training manual prepared him for. Capture didn't mean safety. It meant transfer. Bound, exhausted, barely conscious, Owen John Bagot was moved south through enemy territory, passed from patrol to transport, from jungle silence to iron gates. Rangoon Central Prison wasn't a camp. It was a filter where bodies were tested to see how long they could remain useful. The cell was already full. 11 men packed into a space meant for half that number. Heat pressed down constantly, thick and wet, stealing breath. There were no beds, no sanitation. Disease circulated faster than information. Dysentery, malaria, berry names that arrived as symptoms, not diagnoses. Interrogations came early. The Japanese wanted airfield locations, bombing tactics, formations, altitudes. Bagot gave them exactly 3 things: name, rank, serial number. Nothing more. Silence carried consequences. Beatings were precise, not chaotic. Ribs cracked under controlled force. Food disappeared for days at a time. Thirst was weaponized. Guards understood endurance as something to be dismantled piece by piece. At night, prisoners whispered to stay sane. Counts were taken by touch. Men tracked time by wounds healing or not. Survival wasn't heroic. It was administrative. Eat when possible. Drink when allowed. Move when ordered. Think only far enough ahead to stay alive through the next hour. Bagot learned to ration himself. Energy, anger, memory. He replayed Texas in his mind. Open roads, dry air, ice cream melting too fast in the heat. These weren't comforts. They were anchors. In Rangoon, men didn't die dramatically. They faded. And the prison was designed to make sure no one noticed when they did. This was not interrogation. This was reduction. They moved Owen John Bagot without explanation down a corridor that smelled of rot and old heat and stopped in front of a wooden box, 4 feet wide, 4 feet deep, 3 feet high, no window, no airflow, no room to stand. Barely enough space to sit with knees pressed into chest. They shut the door. Inside time lost shape immediately. Heat built without mercy, turning breath into work. Sweat soaked his clothes within minutes and had nowhere to go. Oxygen thinned. Muscles cramped. Pain became constant, then background, then irrelevant. 14 days. No light meant no rhythm. No sound meant no confirmation of reality. Food arrived irregularly. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes a handful of rice pushed through a slot. Water came warm and insufficient. Every swallow had to be measured. Bagot fought the box the only way he could mentally. He counted seconds by heartbeat, ran multiplication tables until numbers blurred, rebuilt his hometown street by street in his head, imagined engines starting, propellers turning, procedures, checklists, anything structured, anything ordered. The box tried to erase him. Hallucinations came quietly. Voices, movement, cold that didn't exist. He learned not to react. Panic wasted oxygen. Fear wasted strength. Stillness was survival. By the end, his joints barely worked. Skin broke down. His weight dropped dangerously low, but something essential remained intact. The box failed. When they finally opened it, the light burned his eyes, and the air felt sharp enough to cut. Guards expected collapse, begging, something broken. Instead, they found a man who could still meet their eyes. The box had taken flesh. It hadn't taken him. By the time the war began to turn, Owen John Bagot barely resembled the man who had fallen from the sky over Burma. His body had been reduced to numbers 93 pounds, protruding bones, muscle consumed by hunger and disease. Every movement deliberate, every breath earned. But the body wasn't the battlefield that mattered anymore. Survival had become an exercise in control. Control over thought, over memory, over despair. Bagot learned to treat pain as data information to be acknowledged, not reacted to. Fever cycles came and went. Infections flared, then settled. Each morning he measured himself not by strength, but by presence. Am I still here? If the answer was yes, the day was a success. Other prisoners disappeared quietly. Some stopped standing. Some stopped speaking. Some simply didn't wake up. There were no ceremonies, no markers, just empty space where a man had been. Bagot watched, absorbed the lesson, and refused to follow. Texas became a weapon. He returned to it nightly in his mind, long roads shimmering in heat-open skies, without borders, the smell of oil and dust. He remembered his family's voices, not clearly clarity hurt, but enough to keep them real. These memories weren't nostalgia, they were fuel. The Japanese guards saw only a shrinking prisoner. What they missed was the compression happening inside him. Everything unnecessary was gone. Fear, anger, even hope in its fragile form. What remained was something harder. Intent. Bagot didn't survive because he believed in victory or rescue. He survived because survival itself had become the mission executed 1 hour at a time with the same discipline he once applied to checklists and procedures. When liberation finally came, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt unreal, but he was alive. And after everything designed to erase him, that fact alone was an act of defiance. In May 1945, the gates finally opened. British forces retook Rangoon, and the prison that had consumed men in silence emptied just as quietly. There were no cheers inside, only movement confusion and the shock of daylight. Owen John Bagot stepped out, weighing barely 93 pounds. His body hollowed by disease and deprivation, his mind still calibrated for survival. Hospitals came next. Clean sheets felt unreal. Food arrived in measured portions, so bodies wouldn't fail under abundance. Doctors recorded numbers: weight, pulse infections, fractures. Bagot listened without comment. He had learned not to project beyond the next hour. Then came debriefing. Officers asked for timelines, altitudes, formations. He gave them facts. When he reached the parachute descent, the zero attack, the pistol pens slowed. Faces changed. The room cooled. There were no witnesses, no recovered wreckage, no precedent. The report was filed, stamped, and marked unconfirmed. The war was ending. Bureaucracy was beginning.